Hi, everyone. Warm welcome to you. My name is Louise Chow, Director of Insights and Measurement here at Reach. We're super excited to share with you our latest research, Local Advantage, Where Trust Lives. So following our research share out, we're going to have a nice little discussion with our very own resident expert and editorial director, Paul Rowland, for his take on the power of local news and journalism in fostering trust and human connection, and how brands can actually leverage this to further engagement and resonance with their audiences. So at Reach, we have over 120 heritage brands in local and national news that reach 3 in 5 people in the UK. We meet people where they live. So this goes beyond where they live physically. So it's not just their towns and cities, but also through their passions, on their social feed, and where they stand on an important issue. Over the past few months, we partnered with PA Consulting and strategy and insights consultancy with over 25 years of experience in publisher and media. They have a specialization in media and advertising. So our job was really to explore the linkage between news media and advertising effectiveness. For this research, we surveyed over 5,000 people in the UK in August on a variety of topics from sentiment to purchase intent, and as well as impact of advertising and media consumption. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa and Matt from PA Consulting to take you through the 5 key takeaways.
So I'm really excited to share with you some of the research that we've done this summer with Reach. And we spoke to 5,000 people across the UK and asked them all sorts of things around local titles, the types of media they consume, and what is engaging for them when it comes to adverts. We've got 5 key takeaways from today, but I'm just going to take you through the first few, and then I'm going to pass over to my colleague Matt, who's going to take you through the following 3. So we're at a really pivotal moment in the industry, and I'm sure a lot of us can feel that, with the rise of AI and fake news, and there's unfortunately a lot of social and political tensions in the world. And that came out in some of our findings, where nearly 90% said they're actively seeking trustworthy sources, and then just over 80% said they're seeking that authenticity and whatever that looks like to them. And I think we've long known in the industry it's important to think about the environment of where you're placing the ads, but now it's really more important than ever to take this into consideration. And so when we're talking about the environment of ads, we are talking about the content surrounding the ad and also the media brand that is delivering the content and the ad itself. When doing this research, we asked audiences to tell us what channel they trusted the most when looking at these different channels we've got here. So you can see news titles are seen to be the most trustworthy channel, closely followed by some of those more audio channels. We've got podcast and radio, and then online video and social media. And we've blown up this chart to really show you the incremental differences between the data. But it's important to recognise there is trust around online video and there is trust around social media. It's just that news titles themselves are seen to be the most trusted here. So looking at local news titles specifically and how they fit in here, you can see they're incrementally seen to be more trustworthy than some of those other media channels. So really underpinning the wider story that we're discussing here. And staying with feelings and how people feel towards local online media, when it comes to the sentiment, it over-indexes across trust, relevance, and connection. So you can see another really strong story underpinning everything that we're saying here. So when looking at what's driving that trustworthy content, we found it's really down to the local journalists themselves. And our audiences said local journalists are really seen to be experts in what it is that they're reporting on. And often they can connect with the local journalists, be recognising their face or recognising their name. They really feel like they have that rapport and are more likely to trust and believe in what it is that they're saying or reporting on. So we've got a really nice stat here where 63% agreed with this statement. The more familiar I am with a journalist, the more I trust in what they say. So again, really underpinning what we've been talking about and how the recognition of local journalists is really driving that trust and relevance. Sticking with relevance and what's driving relevance in the content itself, it's really those community-focused topics that people are looking for. People are saying that when I'm looking at local content, they find a real strong connection with their community, and it really drives that trust overall. And we've got a really nice stat here where 80% of our audience agreed with. With so much going on across the world that I can't control, I prefer to focus on things that directly affect my life. And I think that plays really nicely into what we were discussing earlier with the rise in AI and fake news. People are turning to their local content and local news outlets to really find things they can trust and believe in. So sticking with how people are feeling and the general sentiment towards online local media, yes, it's more trustworthy, it's more accurate, it seemed to be covering those important issues. So staying with the sentiment towards local media, local online media is significantly more likely to evoke feelings of trust, reassurance and connection versus those other media types that we've talked about. So again, another really strong story here. And we've got a really nice quote I just wanted to finish up with to add a bit of colour to what we've been talking about. And this is from one of our respondents from the survey. Content on local online news sites feels more trustworthy than other media. They don't do rumours or gossip, just relevant updates in a personal and convenient way. I'm now going to hand you over to Matt, who's going to talk about the halo effect on ads.
Thanks, Vanessa. There's a lot of really interesting content there, and I'm sure you'll agree. And while I go through my next couple of points, I just want you to keep two things that Vanessa has just shown you in mind. The first is that now more than ever, for consumers to engage with the content that they see and the ads that they see, the content surrounding the ads more than ever must be seen as trustworthy, and it must be seen as engaging and relevant. The second thing to keep in mind is that when we look at the content that consumers are seeing, they say that the content they see on local online news is more trustworthy and is more engaging than the content they see on any other type of media. Now we combine these two things together and we come up with a hypothesis. So if we know two things to be true, if we know that for audiences to engage with the ads that they see while using media, the content surrounding the ad must be trustworthy, it must be engaging, and it must be professional, and if we also know that the content that audiences see on local online news, more than any other media, they believe to be trustworthy, engaging, and professional, that means that surely this must have a halo effect onto the ads themselves. And this hypothesis was something we tested too. So we asked audiences, okay, diving beyond the content you see and looking at the ads you see while using this media, how do you feel about them? And we can see that the results were really positive. So we can see a big uplift for local online news versus any other media in how it generated feelings of trustworthiness, how the ads were seen to be engaging, and how the ads were seen to be professional versus any other media. And this is something that's really, really positive for local online news and exactly mirrors what we saw for the content to the ads. And the reason all of this is important is because for ads to be effective, we need to measure them by the metrics by which ad companies and kind of brands will measure themselves by. So to do that, we identified 5 parts of the purchase funnel and looked at how effective consumers said ads were on different types of media across the various stages of the purchase funnel. So we asked them, okay, when you see ads on different forms of media, how likely are you to discover new brands that you hadn't heard of before? How likely are you to remember the brands that are advertising? How likely are you to engage with the brands? How likely are you to buy from the brands? And how likely are you to recommend the brands to a friend? And there's a lot going on this slide, but what we see is a really positive story for local online news again. So we can see that throughout the purchase funnel, local online news outperforms every other media type across all stages of the purchase funnel, whether that be a 4% uplift for recall, for example, or an 8% uplift for likelihood to recommend to a friend. The local online news overperformance really is consistent and the local advantage is consistent throughout the funnel. So that's a lot about local online news versus other media in general. But we also wanted to give you a taster in terms of looking at local online news versus a particular media, and just to kind of show how the different strengths of different media really can play as a portfolio against each other, and how local online news can fill a void that social media leaves and meet the unmet needs of social media amongst many consumers. And through this section, we're going to look at this through the lens of younger consumers. Because I don't think it's a new insight to say that younger consumers are using social media. You know, I am a Gen Z person myself. I use social media a lot. Most of my friends use social media a lot. But there seems to be this conception that social media is replacing other media, that social media is pushing out other media and is taking the place of other media. But we didn't think that was the case, and we wanted to test that And the consumers we spoke to backed that up, and they give us a really compelling story on how local online news in particular does fill gaps rather than being pushed out. So taking a step back and looking at why this might be at more of a macro level. So Vanessa's already spoken to you about the state of the world and how the evolving needs of different consumers are really driving their media consumption. And this is more true than ever for younger generations. So it might not be a surprise to know that more than any other generation, Gen Zs and millennials crave deeper belonging and connection. So they say they're constantly searching for ways to fit in and connect with others. They say they value feeling a part of something bigger than themselves. Again, we've all seen studies about the rise of loneliness amongst young people, and this is manifesting itself in what they search for from media sources and from life in general. And this manifests itself directly in what they look for from a media brand. So when we ask younger consumers what a media brand must be for them to engage with the ads that that brand is hosting, more than any other generation, they said that the media brand must be for people like them. So it must make them feel part of something. It must meet their needs in life, and it must reflect their ethics and their morals and what they want to appear to be. So when we look at why young people turn to local online news instead of social media, they turn to it for these three key reasons. Firstly, when they search for trustworthy content, they turn to local online news. When they search for positivity, more than social media, they turn to local online news. And when they search for something that makes them feel truly connected and truly part of something, they turn to local online news. And this is something that reflects itself in the purchase funnel for young people as well. So we know that trustworthy content and connection are both key needs in what drives somebody to engage with the ads that are kind of in content that they see. And because local online news, in the eyes of young people, excels at both of these key needs, ads that younger people see on local are significantly more likely to drive activity across the purchase funnel compared to social media. We've got a really nice quote from somebody that encapsulates that. So this is a female from London who says that we know that she's using social media, but she also says that she reads My London. And the reason she does this is because My London informs her and makes her feel part of something, and these needs that she just doesn't have met, and these are needs that social media just can't meet in her eyes. So she turns to local online news to meet these needs of informative information and connection. So that's a lot about local online news versus other media. And that's all great. And hopefully really we've established here that when it comes to content and when it comes to ads being successful, if we look at media as kind of a league table, local online news is the Premier League of ads being successful. But we wanted to go further than that. We wanted to look at who's top of that Premier League and which local online news brands in particular are the highest performing out of the top performers. And so we tested that too. And we can see that beyond just a local advantage, there's a reach advantage. So Reach is the largest publisher in the UK, and there seem to be some benefits that come with that. You know, I myself am somebody who grew up reading the Sutton Coldfield Observer, and naturally looking for my name in the newspaper after my Sunday league game was something that I really looked forward to. And I developed that implicit sense of trust in that title and in the other titles owned under that umbrella. And that's something reflected by all the consumers we spoke to as well. So when we asked them how they perceive Reach titles versus non-Reach local titles, we saw that they perceived local Reach titles to be more trustworthy, more for people like them, and more likely to connect them to their community than non-Reach local titles. So again, we know that local online news is the top performer in this area, but within that, Reach is an even stronger performer than all the others. And just to wrap this up, because I always think it's best to let the consumer say it themselves rather than me try to persuade you. So we've got a reader here of Devon Live and Cornwall Live from the Southwest. He speaks about the reputability of Reach. He says he chooses these sites because they're from a reputable brand. He knows that when he reads them, everything he reads is going to be legitimate and is going to be trustworthy. And I think that's a perfect encapsulation of why, beyond just the local advantage, Reach has an advantage too. So that's all the content from the research that we wanted to take you through today. I'm now going to hand over to Monica Majumdar and Paul Rowland for their expert editorial take on local media and the ads and the halo effect that can be seen from those.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Monica Majumdar, and I'm Head of Client Strategy here at Reach. And I'd like to welcome Paul. Thank you so much for being with us today. Can you just introduce yourself and what you do at Reach?
Hi, I'm Paul Rowland. I'm Editorial Director for News here at Reach. I've been working in regional and local journalism for about 20 years. I also manage all our regional teams across England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland.
So, first question is around the fact that the research highlights that local journalists drive trust by being familiar, relatable, empathetic, and experts in their field. So how do your journalists foster that genuine connection with people and issues in the local area?
So our journalists are around the country, living in the communities that they cover. So they are authentically from that place, and what matters to the people they're writing for matters to them. So that gives them a real authenticity and compassion for the subjects they're covering. So I think that sets the kind of journalism we do apart. So whether that's, someone who's writing a guide on the best places to take kids at the weekend because they know that their own children enjoy those places, or whether that's when we campaign for changes, it's because we know how important those changes are to local communities. So, as an example, in Manchester, we campaigned for North Manchester General Hospital to be rebuilt at the tune of over £1 billion. We won that campaign. We won that campaign because we were able to not just lobby the government, but we were able to shine a light on just how important the hospital would be to health outcomes for some of the most deprived people in the city. So, that depth of reporting couldn't happen if we weren't of the places that we're reporting on, and that authenticity, you can't fake it. That comes through in our reporting, both in terms of the issues we cover and just the way we talk about them, the local vernacular. We're authentic, and you can see that in what we write and produce and how we write it.
And why is it then that Reach titles in particular are seen as so trustworthy and such pillars of the community?
Lots of our titles have been there for over a century. They are part of their communities. You'll see their branding in historical pictures, in high streets, on hoardings of newsagents, but also we drive enormous audiences digitally among those communities now with our digital properties. So that gives our titles a real basis, a real gravitas in those communities. So we've been there, we've earned our stripes. People know what to expect from us. They know that when we say something, it matters. They know that when a big story is breaking that's really important to the community, that we won't be sensationalizing it. We won't be reporting it in a way that's not healthy or beneficial to the community. And you see that quite a lot when major stories break. So when there was the awful incident in Liverpool during the Premier League parade, we saw that searches for the news story and then Liverpool Echo rose. During the synagogue attack in Manchester a few weeks ago, people were searching for the Manchester Evening News version of that story as much as they were the story itself. So they want to know what our titles are saying about that story, because it's that reporting that matters. When it's almost like they don't believe something's true until our titles have said it, because of the and that trust is really earned. That trust is earned through a way of reporting which takes into account that we've got to be there tomorrow, so other publishers can come and cover a story and leave. We're in that community tomorrow. We've got to be on that street the next week and got to be accountable for the reporting that we put out, which forces a certain standard of trust and authenticity in what we do.
So within the Reach portfolio, we have over 120 plus local titles, but also some national titles. So what is that relationship then? How do the local news and national news complement each other at Reach?
So we're unique, I think, in the market in terms of what we have in our portfolio. There are other companies that have big national brands like us. There are other companies that have regional brands like we do, although not reaching the scale of audiences that ours do. What no one's got is that blend, and we work together really closely as a single editorial team at Reach to make sure that we're benefiting our national titles with that USP from our local portfolio. So a good example of that is our live news network. It's how we cover live and breaking news at Reach, and the principle of that is telling stories through the people who are closest to them. We can get reporters out to stories closer to stories than almost anybody else. So our national titles therefore have the ability to get that story covered by a journalist who knows that area, knows the situation, knows the significance of what's happening, knows who to speak to, and through working together as an editorial organisation, we can make sure that can travel to the parts of our business that can reach audiences wherever people are. And also, I think that works the other way. Our national titles are, their names count for something. They can bring in exclusives that only titles of that scale can, and sharing that content around the network means that we can help our local titles set the agenda, both with major national news breaks, but also the content that they're driving and the investigations they're doing in their local communities.
So when we think about advertising in this space, what are some examples, best-in-class examples of campaigns that have run across some or all of Reach's titles?
So the example I would point to is the work we do with Tesco around their free fruit and veg for schools campaign. So that's come from it's developed from advertising into a great editorially supported initiative, because the objectives of that campaign, which is about giving free fruit and veg to schools, as the name suggests, but particularly in disadvantaged communities across the country, those with a higher proportion of free school meals. That really ties in with what we do. By working with us editorially to show the impact of those schemes and the need for those schemes. That brings that to life in a way that Tesco couldn't do necessarily from an advertising perspective, but from an editorial perspective, us being able to go to schools, and speak very organically to staff members about the challenges they face when kids come to school hungry, without proper nutrition, the impact that can have on learning. That is strong editorial content, but something that really, sits hand in hand with the messages of the community initiative and the commercial initiative that Tesco are trying to push. So that's a relationship we really enjoy. I speak to the Tesco team all the time. We've got a really good understanding about what the editorial parts of the partnership are, what the commercial parts of the partnership are, but they all sort of have at their core the fact that we're connected to our audiences and we understand what drives our communities.
Yeah. Now, in terms of advertising in local news, what's your perspective on if advertising makes experience better or enhances a reader's relationship with a local title?
Yeah, I think advertisers want to be trusted, right? They want their messages to be trusted, and I think when that's next to trusted local news, that has to count for something in terms of how a reader perceives that. If you are in if an advert is surrounded by content which is believable, is authentic, is trustworthy, then I think that certainly carries a halo effect to the advertising around it. And I think also, the loyalty of our audiences locally is also, a great audience to capture, so that, we write a lot of very informed, what's on content. We've got, writers, food and drink writers and family writers who, around the country who, they live and breathe, knowledge of things to do in their areas. And so if they're reviewing, a restaurant, a place to go and get lunch, then, a reader knows that's, that counts for something. And then if you've got if they're in the headspace to think about food and drink, going out for dinner, then clearly a restaurant, advert or something in the hospitality space with that is going to land well. So I think that halo effect is definitely there, both in terms of the type of content and the trust that readers have in what we do.
The report alludes to the fact that younger generations use social media frequently, but they turn to local online news for trustworthy content, positivity, and connection. How are we evolving our reporting to reach these audiences on these new platforms?
The way people consume content has changed over, the last century and will continue to change. But, one of my core beliefs, about what we do is that people will always be interested in the world around them, the world local to them. They will always want to know what's happening in their area, what's happening on their street, how to spend their time. And the medium through which they will receive that information will change, but that fundamental interest will always be there. And that's our responsibility to, continue to evolve how we reach people. The core of our business is not producing newspapers or publishing websites, it's reaching people where they are. And, technology will always challenge us to do that in different ways. And, that's as true now as it's ever been. But we're constantly reorganising how we do things, changing the structure of our newsrooms, bringing in new skills so that we can tell the stories that, are of interest to people, to share the information of interest to people in different ways, to reach them where they are. That challenges us as journalists to, gain different skills, to think about, start telling stories in different ways. But that's exciting, really. It's allows us to a new way of thinking about how to reach people. Allows us to reach people who maybe otherwise would be not engaging with our content. And we'll continue to do that into the future. We don't have a God-given right to reach the people who we've been reaching for generations. We need to keep earning that right to do that by being relevant to them, and that's in terms of the stories we tell and the places we reach them.
Well, thank you very much for your perspective, Paul. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope you found that useful, particularly our 5 key takeaways. Local news is the most trustworthy. Journalists and community topics drive that trust. Local trust has a halo effect on advertising. Local news fills social media's void, and not all local news is equal. Any questions on how to activate or work with our local titles, please do get in touch with us or your agency rep, and the report will be sent to you right after this webinar.